It started on a Tuesday. A perfectly normal, forgettable Tuesday. The kind of day that blends into the monotony of life. A blur of work, dinner, and mindless scrolling through my phone. But that was before I saw them. I work late. My job at a small accounting firm isn't exactly thrilling, but it pays the bills. By the time I leave the office, the streets are mostly empty, the quiet stretching out like a suffocating fog. My walk home isn't long, just a few blocks through a neighborhood that has seen better days. The streetlights flicker occasionally, their pale glow barely illuminating the cracked pavement. That night, I first noticed the children. There were 3 of them, standing perfectly still under the glow of a flickering streetlight, their backs to me. At first, I thought they were just kids messing around, maybe waiting for a friend or playing some kind of game. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. They weren't moving, not fidgeting, not shifting their weight, not even breathing as far as I could tell. Just standing there, like statues carved from the darkness. The tallest one, a boy, wore a pale, oversized shirt that hung loose around his small frame. The other 2, both shorter, had similar worn-out clothes. Their hair was messy, unkempt, as if they had been outside for far too long. I slowed my pace. A creeping sensation crawled up my spine, a primal instinct whispering that something wasn't right. "Hey, you kids okay?" I called out, my voice louder than intended in the eerie silence. They didn't respond. A sharp chill ran through me, the air around them feeling noticeably colder, as if the streetlight itself was draining the warmth from the night. I stepped closer, my breath clouding in front of me. That's when they turned. 3 faces, pale as the moon, with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. Their expressions were devoid of emotion, blank slates of something that looked human, but wasn't. I stopped dead in my tracks. The tallest boy, the one in the loose shirt, took a single step forward. His bare feet made no sound against the pavement. "Go home," he whispered. His voice wasn't right. It was layered, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison, some higher, some lower, all blending into a quiet, unnatural hum. I took an involuntary step back. Then, without another word, the 3 turned in unison and walked away, their movements eerily synchronized. They didn't look back, just strolled off into the darkness, vanishing beyond the reach of the streetlight's glow. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering against my ribs. Eventually, I forced myself to move, practically running the rest of the way home. My apartment was dark when I entered, the quiet pressing in around me like a suffocating weight. I locked the door, bolted it for good measure, and went straight to bed, convincing myself it was just a weird encounter, kids messing around, nothing more. But I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, those hollow, endless eyes. The next night, I took a different route home. It was longer, winding through streets I rarely used, but I didn't care. Anything to avoid that streetlight. Anything to avoid them. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was being ridiculous. But the moment I neared my apartment, my stomach dropped. They were there, standing directly across from my building under another streetlight, waiting. This time, they were facing me. The tallest boy raised his hand slowly, pointing directly at me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was inside my building, door locked, hands shaking. I pressed my back against the door, heart pounding in my ears. Something wasn't right. This wasn't some harmless prank. They had followed me. I barely left my apartment the next day. I called in sick, stayed inside with the blinds shut, jumping at every sound. That night, I forced myself to look out the window. They were there, right outside, standing motionless under the flickering streetlight, waiting, their empty eyes locked onto my window. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. My phone was in my hand before I even realized it, fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There are kids outside my building, I said, voice shaking. They've been following me. They won't leave. A pause. Can you describe them? The operator asked. I swallowed. 3 kids. Pale. Dark eyes. They're just standing there, staring up at my window. Another pause. I heard muffled voices in the background. Then, the operator cleared her throat. Sir, there's no one outside. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled to the window, yanking the curtain aside. The streetlight was empty. They were gone. But I knew they were still there, watching, waiting, and they weren't done with me yet. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the 911 operator assured me that there was no one outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The silence in my apartment was suffocating, my ears straining for the slightest sound. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No voices. No scratching at the door. Just nothing. Still, I knew they were there. By the time dawn broke, I had convinced myself that I was losing my mind. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was exhaustion, stress, or some kind of hallucination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I didn't go to work that day. I stayed in bed, scrolling through my phone aimlessly, trying to find something, anything to distract myself. But my thoughts kept circling back to those children, their pale faces, their hollow, endless eyes, and the way they always stood under the streetlights. By evening, paranoia had set in like a disease. I kept checking the windows, heart hammering every time I peeked through the blinds. I told myself I wouldn't look outside once the sun went down. But I did. And they were there. They stood in the exact same spot as the night before. 3 children. Motionless. Silent. Staring up at my window. I stumbled back from the glass, my pulse a thunderous roar in my ears. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just some coincidence. This wasn't just some random kids playing a prank. They were here for me. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, pacing my apartment as I waited for them to pick up. 911, what's your emergency? I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. They're back. Silence. Who's back, sir? The kids, I said, glancing at the window. The same ones I told you about yesterday. They're standing under the streetlight, staring at my apartment. You have to send someone. Another long pause. Then the operator cleared her throat. Sir, we have no record of any call from you yesterday. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I spoke to someone. Sir, are you sure you're feeling okay? I hung up. My hands were trembling as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. What was happening to me? I tried to reason it out. Maybe the operator had made a mistake. Maybe the system had glitched and my previous call wasn't logged. But that didn't explain the children. That didn't explain why they kept showing up and why no one else seemed to see them. I spent the next few hours locked in my apartment, refusing to look outside again. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Soft, rhythmic knocking. My breath hitched in my throat. I lay frozen in bed, the darkness pressing in around me. It's just someone at the door, I told myself. A neighbor, maybe, but I knew that wasn't true. The knocking came again. Slow, deliberate. Then, a whisper. Let us in. My stomach twisted. The voice was barely audible, but I knew it was them. I forced myself to move, stumbling out of bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. I reached the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. I swallowed hard, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Then the knocking came again. Harder this time. Let us in. I turned the lock and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. But as I stood there, heart pounding, a soft sound drifted through the air. A child's laughter, coming from just around the corner. I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my back against it as my breath came in ragged gasps. They were inside. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them whispering, soft, overlapping voices just outside my door. By morning, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, hands trembling as I downed cup after cup of coffee. I had to get out of here. I didn't care if I was imagining things. I didn't care if I was losing my mind. I just needed to leave. I packed a small bag with essentials, wallet, phone, keys. I was halfway to the door when I hesitated. Something told me I shouldn't open it. I stared at the handle, my pulse hammering. The apartment was silent, but I felt them, waiting, watching. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath and stepped out, locking the door behind me. The apartment building was eerily quiet, the dim overhead lights flickering. I hurried down the stairs, every nerve in my body on edge. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had started to set. I didn't care. I just kept walking, my bag slung over my shoulder, my thoughts a chaotic mess. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to go. I made it 3 blocks before I saw them, standing under a streetlight, waiting. I froze. The tallest boy stepped forward. You can't leave, he whispered. His lips didn't move, but I heard the words clear as day in my head. I took a step back, my breath hitching. The girl, the smallest one, tilted her head. You belong to us now. Then all 3 of them smiled. Their mouths stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were sharp. Too sharp. The streetlight flickered, and then they were gone. I stood there, shaking, my stomach churning with dread. I knew then that no matter where I went, they would always find me, and they would never stop. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just turned on my heel and ran as fast as I could. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. I sprinted down the empty streets, past the quiet houses, past the lifeless buildings, until I reached a gas station on the corner. The bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the place smelled like stale coffee and gasoline. It was real. It was normal. It was safe, or so I thought. The cashier looked up as I stumbled in, panting, drenched in sweat. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with tired eyes and a cigarette dangling from his lips. You all right, kid? I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I swallowed hard, leaning against the counter. There were. I hesitated, realizing how insane I sounded. There were kids, outside, just staring at me. The cashier exhaled a slow stream of smoke, eyeing me carefully. Pale kids. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at him, my throat dry. You've seen them. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured himself a shot, downed it in one gulp, then finally spoke. They've been around for a long time. I felt my stomach twist. Who are they? The cashier let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Ain't that the million-dollar question? He set the bottle down and leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. My brother saw them first, back when we were kids. He said they'd come at night, stand under the streetlight outside our house, just watching, waiting. He was the only one who could see them at first, but after a while, his voice trailed off. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to him? I asked. The cashier's jaw tightened. He poured another shot, but didn't drink it. He disappeared, he said finally. My breath caught. One night, he woke me up, said he could hear them calling his name, said they were closer than ever. The man rubbed his temples, his expression dark. I told him not to open the door. I begged him, but he didn't listen. He swallowed hard, staring at the counter. I heard the door open. I heard him step outside. And then, nothing. A heavy silence filled the room. I felt cold, like something had reached inside me and stolen the warmth from my body. They took him. I whispered. The cashier finally looked up at me, his eyes hollow and tired. They wanted him, he said. And when they want you, they don't stop. I left the gas station in a daze. The night air was thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows on the pavement. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did. And there they were, standing under the flickering light, waiting. I felt sick. My pulse pounded in my ears, my body screaming for me to run. But my feet wouldn't move. The smallest girl took a step forward. I forced myself to move, stumbling backward. My apartment was only a few blocks away. If I could just make it inside. We don't need the door, she whispered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was inside my head. My breath caught. I turned and bolted, sprinting down the street, my heart slamming against my ribs. I reached my building, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I shoved the door open, ran inside, and slammed it shut behind me. My chest heaved. I pressed my back against the door, squeezing my eyes shut. Safe. I was safe. Then a whisper, closer than ever. You belong to us now. My eyes snapped open. They were inside, standing in my living room. 3 pale children, their black eyes glistening. Their lips curled into eerie, too wide smiles. My blood turned to ice. Ow! I breathed. The tallest boy tilted his head. Doors don't matter, he murmured. Not anymore. I felt something behind me. A presence. Slowly I turned, and there, reflected in the dark glass of the window, was me. But not me. My reflection didn't move the way I did. It just stared, smiling. And in its eyes, I saw them. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at my own reflection. It wasn't right. The me in the glass, its mouth was too still, too rigid. Its blackened eyes weren't mine. They belonged to them. I took a step back, my knees nearly giving out beneath me. My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, smiling that dead, frozen grin. A cold breath brushed against my ear. They like you, whispered a voice. I spun around. The children hadn't moved. They stood in the center of my living room, watching me with their eerie, lifeless expressions. You should come with us, the tallest boy murmured. His voice was soft, almost soothing, but there was something wrong about it. Like a radio signal, just barely out of tune. Something was hiding beneath the surface, something I didn't want to hear. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "What do you want from me?" I choked out. The smallest girl stepped forward. "We're lonely." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it filled the entire room. "We lost our home," the boy added, tilting his head. "It burned down. A long time ago." I swallowed hard. "Then go," I said, my voice trembling. "Find someone else." They didn't blink. "We chose you," the girl said. Something about those words made my stomach drop. Chosen. They chose me. I had this sudden, overwhelming feeling that I had already lost. A faint scratching sound filled the room. It was subtle at first, like nails skimming against wood, but it grew louder, sharper. I turned toward the sound and saw the door. Not my front door. Not the one I had locked just minutes ago. This was a different door. A door that shouldn't be there. It stood in the middle of my living room, its surface old and rotting, its knob rusted and caked with grime. A thick, suffocating darkness oozed from the cracks, swirling at the edges. I knew what was behind it. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew. The boy smiled. "It's time." "No," I gasped, stumbling backward. But my body wasn't listening to me anymore. My feet moved on their own. Step by step, I was walking toward the door. "No," I whimpered, trying to stop myself, but my muscles were locked in place. The girl reached out, her small, pale fingers grazing my arm. "Come home," she whispered. The door creaked open. A void stretched beyond it, endless, inky black. I could hear something inside. Not whispers, not voices, just breathing. Slow, deep breaths. Something was waiting for me. My vision blurred. My mind screamed at me to wake up, to break free. And then I saw something inside the darkness. A figure. Tall, shadowy, featureless. Watching, waiting. A single elongated hand reached through the threshold, its fingers impossibly long and gnarled. I felt something crack inside my skull. A memory. A buried, suffocated truth. I had seen this door before. A long time ago, when I was a child. The pale children hadn't found me. They were just reminding me I was 6 years old. I had a best friend. His name was Aaron. We lived in the same neighborhood, rode bikes together, spent every waking moment side by side, until the day he disappeared. He had told me, the night before, about the strange kids standing outside his window. He said they didn't move. He said they just stared. And then, the next morning, he was gone. His parents said he ran away. But I remember the door. I had seen it. In my room. Just like this one. I had heard the breathing. I had seen the hand. And I had felt a choice. That was the last time I saw Aaron. Until now. The figure in the doorway stepped forward. The darkness clung to it, stretching, bending. And then I saw his face. Not shadowed. Not obscured. Aaron. His eyes were black. Just like theirs. "Aaron," I choked out. His head tilted the way the pale children's did. "You should have come with me back then," he murmured. The realization hit me like a train. This was where he had gone. This was where they had taken him. And now they wanted me. My breath came in ragged gasps. This was it. I had already taken too many steps. I had already chosen. The door was open. The void was waiting. I felt the pull of it, a deep, aching pressure in my chest. And then a single thought burned through the haze. No, this was not my choice. I clenched my teeth, digging my nails into my palm. I forced my foot back, then the other. I stumbled, nearly fell. The pale children's faces twisted. The boy scowled. The girl's lips pulled back in a snarl. I could hear the breathing behind me, louder now, angry. The air in the room grew heavy. But I didn't stop. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I made out of my apartment. 1 second I was there. The next I was outside. The street was empty. The streetlight was flickering. I turned back. The door was gone. No sign of it. No sign of them. Just my apartment. Quiet. Normal. Like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I could still feel it. That wrongness. That sense that something was watching me. I don't sleep anymore. I don't stay anywhere too long. Because I know the truth now. The pale children aren't gone. They never leave. They're waiting. And one day, I'll hear the whisper again. One day, I'll see the door. And when I do, I don't think I'll be able to run. I ran. I didn't stop. Not when my lungs burned. Not when my legs nearly gave out beneath me. The cold air cut through my clothes, stinging my skin, but none of it mattered. I needed to get away. The streets were empty. The flickering street lights cast long, distorted shadows, stretching and twisting across the pavement. Every alley, every doorway felt wrong, like something unseen was lurking just beyond my vision. And the further I ran, the more I felt it, a presence. Not the children. Something else. Something bigger. Something older. I could still hear the breathing. Slow. Deep. Waiting. And then I heard footsteps. Not mine. Not echoing. Something was following me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my stomach dropped. The pale children were there. Not running. Not chasing. Just standing, watching, their hollow black eyes locked onto me, their mouths curved into small, patient smiles. They didn't need to run. They knew. They knew I was already theirs. I don't know how long I ran. By the time I stopped, my entire body was screaming in protest. I staggered, barely managing to stay on my feet. My vision swam. I was near the old gas station on the edge of town. It was closed, long abandoned, but the streetlight outside still worked, humming faintly. I leaned against the cold metal of the gas pump, gulping down air, try to force my thoughts into something rational. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Except, I knew it was. I remembered. Aaron. The door. The choice I made all those years ago. I never told anyone. I never told his parents that the night before he disappeared, he told me he was scared, that he had seen the children, that they had come for him, and that they had asked him to choose. One of us had to go, and I had chosen him. I let him be taken. And now is my turn. I heard something behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just movement. A shift in the air, a pull at the edge of my mind like invisible fingers reaching, wrapping, pulling me back. I turned. The door was there. Not in my apartment this time. Not hidden. It stood right in front of me, in the middle of the gas station lot, its rotting wood illuminated by the sickly yellow glow of the streetlight. The air around it shimmered, wrong, bending in ways that didn't make sense. And standing in front of it, Aaron. His eyes weren't black anymore. They were hollow, empty. His face was stretched, distorted, something inhuman barely wearing his skin. But I knew it was him. He smiled. "You left me," he whispered. My breath hitched. He took a step closer. "You chose yourself," he said, his voice cracking, warping, like something else was speaking through him. My back hit the gas pump. My entire body shook. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "It's only fair," he whispered. "It's only fair that you finish what you started." The pale children moved. Not walking. Not stepping. They shifted. 1 second they were standing near the door. The next, they were right in front of me. Cold, small hands wrapped around my wrists, my shoulders. I felt my body being pulled. No, I gasped, thrashing against them. Please no. Aaron stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. His face was no longer human. It was melting, stretching, becoming something else entirely. Something I couldn't comprehend. Something I was never meant to see. The children pulled me closer. The door creaked open. The blackness inside was alive. It breathed. It waited. And then something grabbed me from behind. Strong hands. Human hands. I was yanked backward with such force that the air was knocked from my lungs. The pale children let out a shrill, ear-piercing scream. The door slammed shut. And then everything was gone. I woke up in a hospital bed. A nurse told me I had collapsed in the gas station lot, that a passing trucker had seen me and called for help. They said I had a fever of 105, that I was hallucinating, that I had been mumbling names in my sleep. They didn't understand. They never would. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. No one came to visit me. When I was discharged, I didn't go home. I left town. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even pack a bag. I just got in my car and drove. Because I know the truth. The door isn't gone. It's still out there, waiting. I don't stay in one place for long. I don't let myself get comfortable. Because I know, one night, when I least expect it, I'll hear the breathing again. And this time, I won't be able to run.